how the recordings work. And if you go to my tinyurl.com explicit literacy instruction and you're looking for this particular recording and don't find it, it means we're still working on it, but there are previous sessions recordings in there as well. So you'll find a recording, it just might not be this recording. And Rebecca may or may not be joining us depending on needs. She has a meeting from 2 and 2:30, but I do want to point out that if you'd like to contact her, she is on our resource guide that I just put back into the chat box for you. Up here in my co-teachers, you'll see Rebecca Estock from OSPI, Annie's from OSPI, Bethany is taught with me from CityU. Elizabeth and Shanna are both, Elizabeth's from ESD 189, Shanna's from ESD 171. Suzanne Ender was with a university. She also was with our Dyslexia Advisory Council. And Diana Avery is with ESD 113. Patricia is 114, and Kate Franken is a dyslexia specialist who lives in the Portland area. And please pass it on, speaking of Kate and Rebecca, who will be co-teachers with me in a endorsement program that I'm working on with Evergreen College that you can access actually through PD Enroller because it's a collaboration with, and Jennifer, you mentioned your master's. I don't know if it includes an endorsement or not, but if you put in Evergreen into PD Enroller, and I'll just actually put the link in. If you know of anybody who wants a reading endorsement, we're starting one, and you'll see my co-teachers, Rebecca, Era, Sue Feldman, Lindsay, Dina, and Kate. Please pass it on. It's based on the science of reading and structured around the simple view of reading. Okay, I can see, I think all four of you, so I don't think we have anybody new. So I'm going to go ahead and go through our introduction things, see if there's anything new. I don't think so. Oh, I do have a couple of resources here I'll put into the chat box. Oh, one is about Juneteenth celebration from last year. We'll have to follow and see if there's anything for Juneteenth this year. If anybody has any resources, feel free to put it into the chat, please. Zoom reminders, you all know what to do. Deborah Baldwin, I don't remember what district you're in and not on these notes.
No, I'm currently unemployed looking for work.
Oh, Deborah, you'll be able to find it. Remind me which area you live in?
I live in Fircrest, so Tacoma, University Place.
Mm-hmm.
Currently have applied to North Thurston. We'll see what happens.
There's definitely needs out there. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jill, I'm actually going to be in Spokane the end of the month for doing a presentation with AWSP and WASA on dyslexia. So I'll be out in your region. And that takes us to our learning beliefs. We've all had a chance to chime in. If you would like to connect with something today, please go ahead and put it into the chat box because I'm going to keep this going. You can also unmute. Hi, Nina. Welcome. We also have our agreements. If there's something that I'm missing or that you'd like to call out today, please let me know with an annotation or into the chat box. You've all seen these before. I know I recognize your faces, so I know you're not new. All right. Thank you. I love the grace. Oh, wait, someone else put a star. Let's see, on the non-judgment zone. We all have a lot of work to do, don't we? So thank you for all the work that you are doing. Appreciate it. I'll clear all that off. And recognize our guideposts. None of you are new, so I won't need to go through those. Thanks, Deborah. And our goals, as we think about in our last session, how have we done? Have we deepened our understanding of explicit literacy instruction and how it applies to teaching emergent readers and those who struggle? Have we been expanding our knowledge on those foundational elements of literacy, including phonology, orthography? I didn't really use the term, but when we're talking about sound symbol correspondence and syllables, we're talking about orthography, how things are spelled. Etymology, the history of words, morphology. We had a whole session on syntax, and we'll be talking about semantics today. And have we gained strategies for applying this knowledge to support students' reading growth? So I'm going to invite you to answer that question, or to connect in about anything you may have been reflecting on, or something that's been circling for you since we last met about any of the topics we've talked about so far. And I will address a couple of things that have come in the Jamboard as well. So I'll go over that for you. Let me grab things from the chat box to repost. And the floor is open if there is someone who would like to contribute. Contribute, question, raise a thought. The attendance link and the Jamboard and the resources. And something's come into the chat. Jill, both syllables.
That was a new concept for me this spring because I have not taught reading. I'm a speech therapist, but I totally get it and am going to teach it with my kids.
I will say, Jill, that there are camps, if you will, that are very anti-syllable type. I think it depends on how it's taught. And I definitely agree that we don't need to memorize the names of them, and we don't need to clutter our kids with additional memorization pieces. But if we understand them, we can help our kids divide words by syllables to help them pronounce them. So we can teach vowel flexibility through syllables and understanding of them. So, and there are others who say too, it conflicts with morphemes. Yep, it's a tool. So with morphemes, we have multiple tools. Thanks, Jill. I'll go to the Jamboard. If I can get my mouse here. Because there were a couple things in the parking lot. And I don't know if I responded orally in the past. I don't have IEP goal. Well, I have seen IEP goal examples, but I haven't collected them, so I'd have to think about where. So if that was you, that might be you, Jill. Email me, and we'll keep it on my radar, and and that way I'll have your email. When I find something, I will try and make a reference on that. The orange one, how long do you stay on a set of spelling rules? Again, let's call them patterns before we move on to a new one. And that depends on the kids. So we'd say, how long should it take? Well, that depends on what you're calling the spelling patterns. If you're talking about, for example, a digraph, consonant digraphs are much easier than vowel digraphs. Vowels are always the hardest. Consonant digraphs aren't that tricky. I think that what makes vowel digraphs so tricky is that they usually create homonyms. So in learning those spelling patterns often also involves learning meaning, semantics, what we're going to be talking about today, learning word meaning. So unfortunately, it depends. It depends. Once kids know your sound symbol correspondences well, it only takes 1 to 4 exposures to learn a new word. Now that's for a typical learner, but that they need to understand the sound symbol correspondences in order to do that. Your atypical learners, your kids with dyslexia, or the kids who struggle with word reading, it could take dozens, if not hundreds of exposures. No, I'm exaggerating. That was for learning sound symbol correspondence. I would still say multiply by at least 4, if not 10, for students with disabilities. So it could be, instead of 4 exposures, it could be 16, 40 or so. The dozens, if not hundreds, is learning sound symbol correspondence. This is according to David Kilpatrick and his research. Do I have recommendations for further training? What did I do for my Art in Gillingham? I'm Slingerland trained. I'm not very versed in Lexercise. I've heard good things about Wired. I've seen Laura speak, and I respect her work. I don't know them well enough to speak to. Like I said, I'm Slingerland trained. And frankly, I think most Orton Gillingham programs are pretty well aligned. I went to a conference session once on Wilson and OG and Slingerland, and we're like, they were trying to say, folks, we're all on the same page here. And I think that that's really an important piece as well. Okay, anything else we want to address before we jump into that semantics today? I will say we're not going to get to written expression a lot but except we've been doing that throughout, haven't we? Teaching reading through writing. The invitation's still open. We will all have access to the Jamboard, and you can all take a moment to look through who's here easily, because I think we can see everyone at once today. The pictures today, this is Marianne Wolf, who wrote the Ran Ras, and The Proust and the Squid, and Reader Come Home. This is Janine Herron, who wrote, where's that one? I love her book, but I'd have to look up the title of it again. It's, I'll find it while you're in a breakout chatting. And this is Nancy Young, who lives up in the Vancouver area. I mean, up in Canada, near Vancouver Island, I think. She remember the ladder of reading with the different, that's Nancy there. This was at the Reading Lake. All right, so let's have a little bit of fun before we get into content. Put it into the chat box and actually I'll grab the book. Where would you travel if money and time were no object? Where would you love to spend your summer? I will take off the background in the meantime, give you a moment and go grab, I think, unless it's in one of my bags from traveling, Janine Herron's book. All right, no clue. That's what I get for taking my books places and not having time. Greece, I went to Greece with my son last spring break, and it was a school trip. It was really fun. I'd love to go to Ireland too, Rachel. Deborah, I hope you speak Spanish. The only time I went to Spain, I went through it, and it was a tour of Europe after Peace Corps, and I was doing buses and trains and boats, and I went through Spain, France, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Norway, and England. And Spain was the one person where someone said, if you don't speak the language, you shouldn't be here. Now, granted, I speak French, so I hear that all the time about the French, but.
Well, for us, our family, my son and husband are much more fluent in Spanish than I. My goal has been to keep my streak going on Duolingo and to at least be able to understand what they're saying to me. Whether I'm going to be the verbal one or not, probably not. But I think it's important to constantly keep learning, and every little bit, every day, I learn something I didn't know. And I feel like it helps me understand what kids are going through when they're trying to learn to read, because sometimes it clicks and sometimes it doesn't.
Definitely appreciate that. Nina, where are you going in Africa?
I'm going to Zambia, and I've been before, so I know how long the flight is. If I could teleport, I would choose any of these that have already been mentioned. And my one funny comment about Spain, I had not practiced my Spanish well enough, and I was at a park, and a woman was saying something and smiling, and so I knew how to say, "Can you repeat slowly, please?" I knew that phrase, so I said that, and she repeated it slowly and a little louder, and I still didn't catch it. So she said it louder and slower, and a person walking by said, "She says you're very beautiful."
Oh.
I was like, oh my goodness. And here I am asking her to please say it again. Please say it again.
Oh, that's really sweet. It reminds me of when I was in Morocco. My Moroccan grandma couldn't speak much English, and I couldn't speak much Arabic. And she would point to me and she'd say Auntie Zwina, which means you're beautiful. And I'd say Auntie Zwina, and she'd shake her head and she'd say Sherfa, which means old woman. And I said Walakin Zwina, which is but beautiful. And she'd say, but Walakin Sherfa, Walakin Zwina, Walakin Sherfa. And it just kept going back and forth, but beautiful, but old woman, until we were both laughing.
I love that you could say that with her.
I couldn't say much, but I could say that much. And or she'd, because it was also I'd leave the house and she'd say Finradia, which is where are you going? I'd say Medina. And then she's like, I can't remember how she said it, but she's like, you're coming back. I'm like, okay, she was good. She just wanted to know I was coming back. So yes. Well, actually, Nina, I can say I don't know in 7 different languages. I think it's the most useful phrase we I don't know. So I appreciate that. And Deborah, when you're saying about learning, I think that's really, really crucial as well. All right. So this was our group, 24 of the 5 of you. But you can see, again, a very heterogeneous group. I'd be curious where you 5 fit into this, but the whole point of doing the survey was to have it anonymous. A few things that I want to draw attention to, though, before we get started, which is that the link between reading comprehension and writing and semantics. That studies have found that when students write about what they're learning in any subject, it boosts their understanding and retention. Cognitive science helps explain why. A powerful way to get information to stick in long-term memory and ensure you can retrieve it is to recall it and explain it to someone else. This is from Natalie Wexler. In other words, this is putting it into your own words, which is what we do when we write. So I will put where did I? This was at HTTPS. I'll put it into the chat box for you. Although it says source email, hopefully this link will work for you so you can look into that. But Natalie Wexler wrote The Writing Revolution, and she's actually a reporter, kind of like Emily Hanford did for reading, Natalie did for writing. Whoops, Control V. And so hopefully that link will work for you. If not, I'll keep looking for the source, and we have more resources from Natalie that I can be sharing as well. Is that what I just wrote? It is. So I have some more resources. That's what I just read to you. I didn't realize that I didn't look ahead to see that I put it there. It was in the notes for that last slide. So I'll put these resources here into the chat for you. That's why I need to look ahead, right? So just taking a moment to see it as well as hearing it. It's retrieving it so you can explain it to someone else, retrieving, recalling it, putting it into your own words. What a powerful process we do for writing. In other words, we write to understand what we read. We also write there's so many reasons for writing. All right, so we're putting that last piece in together. Remember, that's the simple view of reading. And we look at the literacy how wheel and the wheel from IDA. And we look at the structured literacy overview that was put in by OSPI. We look at this is the comprehension piece, which you see the purple, the semantics piece here. This is the language comprehension piece that leads to my reading comprehension. So I'm going to start with a warm-up. And I'm going to ask for volunteers to read this aloud to us. You'll notice there is no punctuation. And other than the capital letter I, there are no capital letters. So you are going to need to decide where to pause and where to pause like it's a comma, where to pause like there's a period. So I'm just going to give you a moment to read it to yourself. And then I will give you an opportunity to read it aloud. It always works best if we have 2 different people, and hopefully those 2 different people have some different interpretations. Who would like to start? Good. Hi, Colleen, are you volunteering? She says, wait, I just got here. What are you talking about?
Just to read the first sentence or
the whole paragraph.
Oh,
Pausing where you would put a period, or
okay.
Pausing where you would put, and I'm going to grab the Jamboard and resources for Colleen, who just joined us. Okay.
I want a man who knows what love is all about.
All
You
right.
you are generous, kind, thoughtful people who are not who are not like you admit.
We just stop it here. People who are not like you admit to being useless and inferior.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then you have ruined me for other men.
Mm-hmm.
I yearn for you. I have no feelings whatsoever when we are apart.
Okay. I'll move it there.
I can be I can be forever happy. Will you let me be yours? I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Thanks for Rachel. Somebody have a different interpretation? Dear John. Rachel sounds like Gloria likes John, right? How about this one? Dear John, I want a man. Who knows what love is all about? Let's try this way, actually. Who knows what love is? All about you are kind, generous, thoughtful people who are not like you. Admit to being useless and inferior. You have ruined me. For other men, I yearn. For you, I have no feelings whatsoever. When we're apart, I can be forever happy. Will you let me be yours, Gloria? I'm seeing some smiles. Look at what a difference punctuation can make, isn't it? Punctuation is super important, isn't it, Rachel? I think that was Rachel who put that in, yes. Notice what a different tone. Just found stopping and playing places. So the semantics, the meaning changes by our prosody. So this is one of the things that's really complicated when it comes to fluency, because people say that fluency and that leads to comprehension. But notice how I could not pause in the right places without understanding the message here. So my prosody will be different depending on my understanding of the message and my comprehension of this. I do have a link for you for this. I'll clear this off and take you to where I found that. Unfortunately, I keep changing this. So this is two different versions. It's not John and Gloria, it's John and Harriet, but you get the idea. Let me make it a little bit bigger if we can. Oh, I can't. Can I make it bigger? Let's see. I think plus symbol. Nope. That might have worked a little bit, but you get the idea. I want a man who knows what love is all about. I think this is what Rachel read. You are kind, generous, kind, thoughtful. People who are not like you admit to being useless and inferior. You have ruined me for other men. I yearn for you. I have no feelings whatsoever when we're apart. I can be forever happy. Will you let me be yours? Versus you can see the, will you let me be yours, Harriet? So I'll put this in the chat box. It's also in our tinyurl.com explicit literacy instruction. But the importance of semantics, isn't it? So, moving on.
And
Yeah.
The big clue that you gave us, if we looked and thought about it, it's a Dear John letter, meaning there's probably going to be a breakup.
Could be, exactly. But not the way that Rachel read it, right? Rachel read it as a love letter, but it could
Yes.
be it could be a breakup letter as well. Thank you for that, Deborah. So we're coming back to our reading rope. Remember that we talked about the need for, in the language comprehension side, that background knowledge, vocabulary, syntax, and the ability to make inferences, and your knowledge of what a love letter or hate letter looks like in that last one. So of course, we needed to be able to read those words, but then we had to understand the meaning in order to make meaning of that text. So hence, remember that simple view. Now we're focusing on those language comprehension strands here, this left side of the rope, particularly thinking about background knowledge. And we've talked about language structures, syntax, but we're going to be focusing on the semantics here, what things mean. So when I'm talking about structured reading comprehension, one of the places I want to start is thinking about how do we help our kids with reading comprehension? What can we do, particularly if we're starting with background knowledge, what can we do before kids read? What can we do while they're reading, and what can we do after they're reading? So notice, obviously, we can build their background knowledge. This is one of the things I say when I talk to parents, is one of the most important things we can do to support our kids' literacy is to give them experiences. Take your kids out to museums and take them traveling. We talked about going to different countries and speaking different languages. Broaden their minds and broaden their background knowledge so that when they encounter a text and then there's the word swine, they know that you're talking about a pig. You know, that mean, take them to farms, help them understand and feel and experience this, because it gives them that schema to hook their hats onto when they encounter something new in a text that maybe they've had some experience with. Go ahead, Deborah. I think so. You unmuted.
Oh, just as a librarian, I also think, especially with older students, using picture books will give them a virtual field trip. In a sense, it gives them some of that background knowledge that if you're looking at the topic of being, oh, my brain just went blank.
How about bees?
Okay, yes, but you have never, maybe you've only tasted honey, maybe you haven't really. The picture book will help support and build that scaffolding for students who haven't had that experience, like refugees. If you that and understand that, but in a picture book, that's going to give it more connection for them.
You remind me, I don't have the closed captions on. I'm going to make that for us all because you broke out a little bit there.
Oh,
so
sorry.
No, it wasn't your fault. No problems.
My connection is being a little wonky, so I'll take my video off and see if that helps.
No problem. Thanks, Deborah. But you're right. Let's build on that background knowledge. Let's build our vocabulary. Let's talk with our kids, not just to them, because that will expand their vocabulary. Then during reading, let's look at what is the main idea? How do we generate that? And that's one of the things that our kids need to think about: lists and making connections to what they're reading. Hi, Afia. I'm going to go mute you until, I need to make sure that everyone's muted upon entry. You need to take care of that for us. Hold on. There we go. That way we won't worry about that again. And then, of course, question writing is one of the things that we'll be focusing on as well. But then after reading, let's apply those vocabulary words. Let's summarize. Those are some of the things that are really challenging. This next slide, this comes actually from the Reading Comprehension Blueprint by Nancy Hennessy. And I may do a book study on that next year because it's a really, really good and dense book. I can look forward to when you're in breakout rooms shortly. But I think that it's important to think about what she calls the ABCs of background knowledge: activate and assess, build, and connect. And so I'm just going to give you a moment to put a stamp on at some of these that you're connecting with, like Deborah was just talking about, experiences or those images, pictures. So what are some things that you do to activate and assess your students' background knowledge? Do they have the background knowledge that they need to be able to understand this text? To build their background knowledge so that they can connect to text, or to connect what they already have to some of their background knowledge as well. So I'll give you a moment on those, and I think I can grab this book. Lots of stars coming in. Anything that you want to add that's not on this list, either orally or in the chat? And so here's the book that this one comes from, Nancy Hennessy, Reading Comprehension Blueprint, Helping Students Make Meaning from Text. It's big, it's dense, and it's got a lot of really good stuff. And then here's the one I was mentioning earlier, by Janine Herron, Making Speech Visible. This is really good for your young learners as they're just starting off. She's actually created I don't know what she calls this, but an alphabet talking shapes. So you notice, I don't know if you can see those. Jill, can you give me a thumbs up whether or not that's visible for you? Thank you. Where you notice that the letters are in the shapes, or there's a shape around it that helps cue the kids, like the acrobat and the tree and the cat and the snake and the elephant and the net, to help kids, again, teaching reading through writing, starting with their earliest learners.
What was that one called?
That one was Making Speech Visible, by Janine Herron. And actually, oh, I love it. Someone's added videos. Videos really ought to be on here. I definitely would add that as well. Those virtual field trips, those virtual opportunities. Definitely a great opportunity. All right, I'm going to give it clear these off. I see one person's interviews. I love that. Those field trips. When I attended a very small school, so that every 3 years, I don't know if I told this group that or not, because there were fewer than 10 kids per grade, every 3 years they would take the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classes in the bus and go to Denver for a week. And some of those kids had never left the tiny town or the area in the south where we were in Colorado, 6 hours south of Denver. And we went to the Mint, we went to the Keebler Cookie Factory, we went to the Capitol. I mean, looking to see how money was made at the Mint was really a cool experience. And talk about building our background knowledge. It was really a powerful experience. All right, I'm going to clear all that off. And I'm going to share one chart or web that I really like. And this is called unfortunately, it's called RAN, which stands for Reading and Analyzing Nonfiction. I say RAN because it could be confused with the rapid automatized naming. But you'll notice, so what in gray is what you see at the top that I've used with professional development. The example that you see here at the top pocket chart or the hanging thing is from a 2nd grade example, and I'll put that one into the chat box. And what I like about it is that instead of a KWL, where you usually have charts and a marker where you write all the things you know, and then you write all the things KW, the W is for what you want to learn, K for what you know, W for what I want to learn, and L for what I've learned. This one, with this, you write them on stickies instead, so that after the learning occurs or in the midst of the learning, you can move your sticky from what I think I know to either I'm confirmed I was right, or oops, it was a misconception, I was wrong on that. So you notice that for the kids, she said yes for confirmed, or oops for a misconception. And then we have another place for new information and for wonderings. So this was just another version of a KWL, but one that I think also supports when we want kids to have flexible thinking and not simply saying, I know this, but I think I know it. Let's challenge and let's recognize that our beliefs or things that you know it until you know better. And I think that that's something we all need to be modeling for our kids is so that we can have a dialogue with each other about with it is open to learning more.
It feels like this would be good on a Jamboard. So you have that digital copy that the sticky notes sometimes disappear, fall off when you don't want them to.
I've done it on a Jamboard, Deborah. I like that as well. Somebody said a Kanban board. I haven't heard of that. A Dawson, would you like to share us? Hi.
Hi. It's a Kanban board is really, it's like a workflow thing. It's, yeah, not interesting at all.
Well, thank you. I'll go and look into it and find out more if you think it would be helpful for us. I appreciate the connection. This comes too, though, remember when I said that it's really the connections between the sound symbols, and now when we're talking about semantics, the meaning is how we really remember words. Remember this triangle that we had at the very beginning. When we drill down though into the semantics piece, what do we mean? Again, this comes from Nancy Hennessy's book, The Reading Comprehension Blueprint, is when we're talking about semantics, we're talking about the meanings that are influenced by the morphemes. Remember when we did morphology and we recognized that if I just add the letter S, I've added another morpheme, and that changes it from a singular to plural of whatever it is, or it could change it from walk to walks. My morphemes influence semantics. But when I'm thinking about semantics, I can also think about the category of the item of whatever it is. For example, if I'm talking about maple and palm and fir and fig, I'm talking about kinds of trees. So I can pull these little smaller pieces into a larger category of things. Those trees are under the category of living things or plants. And so you keep broadening in what are those categories and how can I look at where they're similar and where they're different. Syntax we talked about last week. And so how is this word being used? Remember the example of the word can, is that if I say a can is a thing, in this case, my syntactic category is a noun. And this means something that it holds liquid and it's made out of usually metal. But if I say I can go, that's a very different syntactic category. Can in that case is being used as a modal, has a very different meaning. And don't ask me to explain that because it's a hard one. Remember that our content words are easier to define than our function words. But then I think about what are the connotations? What does it mean in this context? And that comes to do with our figurative use as well. Does the meaning imply something completely different? If you think of, like, for example, a spendthrift, or there are terms where if you think about the meaning of each part of that term and put them together, it comes up with a new term is completely opposite. So we use things figuratively in creative ways, and that can really influence the kids' understanding of semantics as well. Our language is extremely complex because we play with it. I mean, most languages are, but we will use words in ways. I mean, when people use idioms, for example, he's got a bee in his bonnet, you don't have a leg to stand on. I mean, we have so many idioms and creative ways that can be very confusing for some of our learners, especially our second language learners. Stingy versus frugal, great example, Jennifer. Exactly. Think of politician versus statesman, or even thin and skinny and things like that. Those are all when we think about those connotations. So when we're talking about semantics, this is again Natalie Wexler. And I want to talk about the vocabulary that we expose kids to. So I'm just going to take a moment with this and look at it. I can't remember if we read this last week or not when we talked about syntax, because it applies in both. Nina, does this look familiar? We did talk about this one last week. Okay, good. I forget what I added to things, but I'm just going to draw attention to here. Last time we talked about the syntax. Now we're talking about the vocabulary. And so how can we help support them? Let's read aloud to them. And as I said earlier, have our conversations, that talk with students and not instead of to them. And that passive voice, we're not going to go there on that. So we're talking about words and constructions in this case. Like I said, syntax we talked about last time, and vocabulary. Okay, so when I'm talking about semantics, and then soon I'll give you a chance to talk to each other about all this that we've been talking about. We're talking about either lexical semantics, those individual words and their relationships to each other, or sentential semantics, which is sentences in larger units. So with our lexical, we've got networks of associations that are built up over time and in multiple contexts. So this is our word understanding. So for example, if I'm thinking about bat, and I can make connections to other mammals, or I can make connections to sports and what I'm using for baseball. So there are different connections that support my understanding of that word bat. And that actually leads really perfectly into that next bullet there, is that we understand these words and concepts in relation to each other. On the other side, sentential, it's the meanings of sentences. So I'm looking at phrases and sentence meaning and how they cohere. And that's really difficult for especially some of our second language learners or our kids who are extremely, some of our learning disabilities who are very concrete, might have to support them with their pronouns and their reference. When I say it or he, who or what am I talking about? It may be clear to us, but it may not be clear to these readers. So those are some of the things that we may need to think about, how these phrases work together, how they're connected, these referential devices that we're talking about that bind these words together, and the conjunctions, what those mean. Remember last time when we had the difference between, although I was studying, my sister ran screaming through the house, although, whenever, because, etc. All that changed meaning, didn't it? So that's where we're talking about the sentential semantics side. Okay, I hope for doing just a little bit. Oh, gracious. I'm going to build in a, no, soon we're going to have practice time, and that practice will be given an opportunity for you to go into breakout rooms. So how do we build this, an understanding with semantics? So number one, you've heard me saying a lot. Let's start with that listening comprehension. Let's start with that oral discussion. Let's start with helping our kids build their vocabulary and their language knowledge orally. That's going to be your biggest strength for our kids. Get them practicing oral things. So what at the word level, as you start with the listening comprehension, there's a great book that supports that here, Phonemic Awareness in Young Children by Marilyn Adams, Barbara Foreman, Lundberg, and Byler. Then we can think about, with listening comprehension, this includes class reading and discussions, visualizations, Socratic questioning, verbalizations, visualizations. That word level is when we talked about morphology and vocabulary development. I'll put in a link for learning more about that, YouTube on the morphology piece. And this is a great vocabulary map resource I found. And then on that sentence level, that reading comprehension at the sentence level, this is influenced highly by syntactic relationships. So the meaning, relationship meaning in grammar, and the meanings between and among words. And this relies heavily on memory and attention. So this is one of the reasons why you may have heard in multiple contexts, graphic organizers, those support your memory. Particularly our kids who struggle with working memory, and depends on the complexity of the text. How many of you have read Joylet Club? A long time ago, perhaps. Anybody remember Joylet Club? So I'm not seeing any hands, but I will say it was complex it was a novel, and complex in all of the characters. It would focus on different characters, and then it would talk about their moms and their sports. I needed a graphic organizer as a strong adult reader, because I would forget who was what, and I wanted to write things down and just keep notes on this so that I could follow the story, because I'd forget who the relationships were and who the moms were and who was this tennis player versus who was the chess player. So these were things that the whole point about these graphic organizers is to support the memory and your attention as you're reading. Okay. I will stop at this one because I see that we're going to have a pause and reflect here. As we talk about going to beyond the phrase, going beyond the individual words, we talked about phrases last time. Remember the nouns, verbs, prepositions, and the clauses. These are the different kinds of sentences, and of course, leading to different texts. So I'm going to leave this up. I love it. Yes, that family tree. I appreciate that. I'm going to leave this up and give us a pause and reflect to kind of chat about this before we get into some application and practice in identifying and supporting kids' reading, to look at how do I structure words and phrases as my kids are reading to help support their comprehension. So before I do that, I've been talking a lot, and I want to give you an opportunity to exchange and to process orally. I'm going to leave this up, but if there's a different frame that you want me to go to as you're talking, I'd be happy to move to that. So I'm going to pause the recording and make our breakout rooms. I think I can do 3 groups of 3. We'll have small groups today. And if I'm wrong, if somebody comes in and or there aren't people in your room, please let me know and I'll rearrange things. So let me check, and we don't need 15 minutes. I think we'll do 7, just kind of give you a moment to kind of process orally. And when you get back, we'll talk about, give you some application practice time. Okay, so your groups are all open and I will share, shift share. Okay, Jennifer, I just realized that my sharing was paused. I hope that wasn't the case the whole time. And you're gone. Nope, you're still here. Were you saying this? Nope. All right, everyone's gone. Okay. Hi, Roxanne. And let's hear from some of the groups and some of the things you talked about.
Alicia, I just wanted to add that if it was earlier in the year, like I've been overwhelmed every week with the information I'm learning, but I am gleaning little bits that I'm taking back. On Friday, the student that I work one-on-one with just for one period, it's like, here's what I learned last night. So earlier in the year would be awesome, because you know, we've got tomorrow and the Tuesday left with this little guy, and then he's going to be on his own all summer.
I know. So Nina, I did offer one in September, October, and then I had another one, I think it was January, February, and this was the 3rd one this year. And actually I did have one last August too.
Okay. Thank you.
So you can take it again once I figure out the dates, and you'll definitely be, but and I also have long full day versions of all this as well. So definitely I appreciate all the input. Fridays later. Oh, we'll work on it. Look, nobody wants Fridays after school. keep coming the input, and anybody else you know of, feel free to send me input from on thoughts on that. So how about your conversations about semantics, lexical semantics? I'll put this back up for us to talk about. What did you talk about in your groups? Then we'll get into some application piece.
We talked about noun phrase and verb phrase, and it's good because then it not only identifies the noun, but it also includes those function words that they don't always, or that they don't remember sometimes. So I like that part. And we talked about that it answers the questions, the who, did what, where, when, why, those kinds of phrases. And then we got kind of off on exploring back to what you were talking about when you were reading and needed a little graphic organizer. So then we started brainstorming about graphic organizers in our group.
They're a great tool. They definitely support our memories, don't they? Thanks, Jill. Would either of the other rooms like to share? Yeah, the invitation is there. So where we're going to link it though and practice, particularly on the phrasing, and get a feel for how that supports our understanding as we read, is something that Beth Slingerland calls structured reading. And so this is a way to support students' comprehension of sentences and how they fit in. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to need some volunteers to read. I prefer to have 3 or 4 at once. This is the way I was taught to do it, with how we'll be doing it together. And then we're going to see a video of the same person we saw last week. But instead of doing the phrases, now she's going to be reading from the book, doing the same kind of process that you do here. You'll be seeing. She will choose one person for each of these steps that I'll be doing. I like to do 3 or 4. There's no right answer on this. So you'll get a chance to see 2 different ways of approaching this. But I do need 3 or 4 of you to please unmute so I know that you're volunteering to read aloud for us. Thank you, Jennifer. Jill, you're really not saying me. Thank you, Nina. I see you unmuted. Rita, thank you. You'll need to unmute if you are going to read aloud. Thank you. And one more. Deborah, it looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So I'll start with Jennifer. Will you please, in this passage, read us the first three words that say who?
Thomas A. Edison.
Nina, can you please read the next word that tells us what he did?
Lived.
When did he live, Rita?
From 1847 to 1931.
Thank you. Deborah, will you reread that sentence pausing at the phrases?
Thomas A. Edison lived from 1847 to 1931.
Thank you, Deborah. All right, I'm going to go backwards. Rita, will you read the next three words?
He is called
What is he called, Nina?
One of the greatest inventors in the world.
Where is he talking about, Jennifer?
In the world.
Okay. So now if Nina, I know you were pausing, you weren't sure whether you should go all the way and that's totally okay. What feels more natural to you? One of the greatest inventors in the world? Perfect. One of the greatest inventors, if that's as far as your students go, you say, where in the world? So you can see we're still building these. Either one, wherever is the natural feeling, pause. Jennifer, will you reread that sentence, please, pausing at the phrases?
Sure. He is called one of the greatest inventors in the world.
Thank you. Okay, so next is it two words that tell us what, Deborah?
His inventions.
Rita, will you tell us about those inventions? The next four words?
they have improved the lives of millions of people.
Okay, now she went all the way. That works. If she had stopped, it had improved the lives. I would say, which lives? Whose lives? Of millions of people. So those, we can talk about it. Nina, will you read that sentence again, pausing at the phrases?
Yes. His inventions have improved the lives of millions of people.
Thank you. Jennifer, please tell me the next phrase or word that tells us who.
Edison.
Deborah, tell me about him.
Was not afraid to try.
What do you suppose he's not afraid to try, Rita? We know yet from our reading?
What is he not afraid to try?
Yeah. What do you think he's not afraid to try?
We don't know yet.
We'll continue reading on. We'll get there. Can you reread it for us, please, Nina? That sentence pausing at the phrases.
Edison was not afraid to try.
All right. And we're not going to get through the whole thing. We'll just go the rest of this paragraph. We have a long, actually, clause starting this one, Jennifer. Can you read us the first clause here that tells us when?
Sure. Even when he failed with something new.
Excellent. And will you please read the rest of that sentence for us, Deborah?
He did not give up.
Will you reread that sentence for us, Rita?
Read the full sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Even when he failed with something new, he did not give up.
Nina, do you think that answers the question of what he wasn't afraid to try?
Yes.
In what way? What do you think that means? And what wasn't he afraid to try?
Anything new.
That would be my interpretation too. So do you see how we built this and we structured this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to give us, and now I will say one of the very common question is, do I do this with the whole passage that we're reading? No, we do this with a paragraph or two so that we can get the kids accustomed to pausing and making these connections. And then we might say, now I want you to read the next paragraph to yourself, thinking about the phrases, and then we're going to talk about. And so then after I've given you a moment to read that next paragraph, I might say, when did he make his first record player? You can see that in 1877. this talking machine, which talking machine? What are they talking about? Oh, the record player. Now, this is originally when things on records weren't music. It was voice. It was the only way to record voice. It surprised the world. Why do you think? Because there's never been a recording of anything before. So this is thinking about that brand new. His major invention that was something else was that intervention light. So then we talk about, he invented this. Which one? What is this? Oh, it's the electric light. So we can make these connections in talking after giving them a bit of time to read on their own. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I am sharing with sound so we could see this in action. This is longer than last one. We're not going to listen to the whole thing. And I'm going to advance it. Let's see, you skip forward 8 times to start the reading of text. Typing the letter O will advance 10 seconds. So this is something I knew I learned somewhere. So I'm going to pause the recording for us here. I'm going to resume the recording. So let's have our whole group chat. How did that feel? What was any affirmations? How did you do on those passages? Who would like to talk about your experience? We have 3 groups. Hi, Leisha.
Hey, I got my camera to work. We just decided that it's going to take practice on the teacher part of what to ask.
It certainly
I got
does.
stumped when we were doing it on our own.
Yes, and that's the exact reason why I want to give you time to practice it. I think, let me pull up one of them. Let's see, I'll put it here. Whoops. Because, and remember how I said that some of them, this is the second one, some of them already had things broken for you. Let's take a look at this one. So, for example, when Sam heard the garage door open, I don't like that. I like when Sam heard the garage door open. And that's a clause. To me, that's more logical. He sat next to the door. Okay, that works. As soon as Matt opened the door, why did he do that? To come into the house. You could do as soon as Matt opened the door to come into the house. That's a little long for the breath, though. So it's tell me when, as soon as he opened the door, why did he open the door? To come into the house. Then what happened? Sam ran out. How? As fast as he could. So, obviously he ran and ran. You wouldn't need to structure that, but so you have to think about what's natural for you. People often ask me, well, should I do it here or here? What feels natural? This is where our knowledge of semantics and syntax comes into my understanding of what makes it. I mean, that they'll see here. One Sunday afternoon, Jim's grandma filled. That doesn't work for me. Jim's grandma, that's the who, did what? Filled a big pot. With what? With meat. Okay, so she keep going on that. She filled a big pot with meat. Okay, you could do that one together, but I would divide it between grandma and filled. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to go to those and practice them as well. Nina, there is no script for questions. This is where I know, but that's the beauty of this, though, is that you can take any text and do that. And some texts are more or less supportive of that. So that's actually where I wanted to go next. And since we only have till 4 o'clock, I'm going to take us there. Is there are some texts that can help and some don't. So let's take a look at this. And notice how in this text, and I actually have some of these, I usually just hold them up, but then I found some, because you'll find that in the Curious Georges, some are supportive and some are not. And I think in this handful, 2 are and 2 aren't. But notice how here, George's tooth began to hurt, breaking up a phrase there. The man, breaking up a phrase there. The next one, the man with the yellow hat, did what? Reminded him. That one works. But notice how they're just, it seems completely random to me. He felt so strange that what? That George couldn't even enjoy his favorite. Okay, let's look at this one. Down in the street, where? Outside the prison wall. What happened? Stood a man, a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon. There's a clause. Why? For her brother. What happened? George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have what? A big red balloon. He reached over and what? Tried to help himself. So notice how this one is much more supportive. But I'll go to this one. It's going to be like your first example there. And this one, it's pretty much here. A lady was showing Betsy. Completely, they're not paying attention at all to clauses in something like this, are they? Versus, this one's got a great example. Love this one. Take a look at this one. With the hook, on the string, and the string, on the stick. Look at all those prepositional phrases on its own line. Totally supportive for your students to read phrase by phrase instead of word by word. So some of our passages are more or less supportive. Did that support or contribute to or connect with any of your whole group conversations about that? You just like, yeah, we talked about that stuff like that. Anything anyone would like to add?
We did this, we talked about the phrasing and we talked about the stew and we, I don't know, some of the places that they broke it up did not jive with me, but, like, can you have just one word? Like, then, like they did on one last afternoon or the other afternoon or whatever they did. So I would have done then, comma, and then the next line.
Then she put in some water, or then she put in some water. Either one would work depending on the flow and your students' lung capacity, whether it feels right. Then she put in some water, or then she put in some water. Tell me about that water with lots of potatoes. That's also, she's putting in water and potatoes. What else? Some onions and some celery. Some onions. So you're building on those. I agree with you. Later in the day tells us when, what happened. She cut up some carrots. Why? To put in the pot. Which pot? Of stew. Okay, so you see how we're building those. She put in beans, peas, and tomatoes. That one's pretty short. There's your another then, Jill. I don't know if this is the one you were referring to. She added some salt and pepper. So some of these are pretty short already, but some of them, this is the whole point here is we're trying to get our kids to move away from reading word by word. Let's get them to read phrase by phrase and show the connections among these. Go ahead, Jill.
I was just gonna say, it was the first one when they put, then she put in some water as separate. I don't know.
Yeah, that doesn't work for me either. However, I will say to put in is a phrasal verb, like to turn on a light. And this is where our language has gotten much more complex and confusing because to put in, I mean, to put in is the verb. And what did she put in? She put the water in. So it's not like it's not a prepositional phrase in some water because put in is the verb. And that's especially confusing for our second language learners who come from languages where they don't have those phrasal verbs like we do. That has to turn on the light. You're not actually turning on something and you're not turning, the light it's not on the light. You're not turning on the light. You're turning on, what are you turning on? The light. So that's a phrasal verb, but we don't talk about phrasal verbs. I mean, I know that from my ESL world when I was learning to become an ESL teacher. But how often, I mean, does anybody have heard that phrase phrasal verb? We don't talk about those. And yet, this is hard for kids. For a native kid who understands turning on the light is easy. But if you say put in some water, you're free. Then when you're talking about, especially a prepositional phrase, it isn't in some water. This is actually put in is your verb. And that's complicated, isn't it? That takes some more thought on our part to really understand what we're talking about here. Okay, couple more shifts because I want to give you another opportunity to get into breakout rooms one more last time because I have an activity bringing everything together. So we did talk in the very beginning about beginning, during, and after. Here's another way, a couple things on getting the gist. Here's a getting the gist toolkit for you. This came from, where's my chat box? Here it is. This came from the book, I just put it away, unfortunately. The Structural Literacy Interventions, edited by Louise Spear-Swerling. And it's interventions for, I think, K6. So I think it's over there on the shelf. It's because it's in my I've read pile. So I can get that out if anybody wants to learn more about getting the gist. But this is just the process for getting that who or what of the text, what's that most important information, and then writing that gist sentence. Another one that we talk about with the during is question writing, helping your kids think about, again, remember we're talking about writing, bringing those skinny questions that can be answered with one word or sentence. And those are a lot of things that we've had in our phrases, wasn't it? Who, where, when, why. Those were word for word in the text. Versus fat questions, they require information from multiple places in that text. And you have to think about that, my own prior knowledge from the text, a lot of inferences, and they may require one or more sentences to answer, not just in individual words or phrases. So I'm going to put a link for more information on that as well. Okay. The National Reading Panel recommendations. So when you go to the National Reading Panel 5, these were things that they talk about making sure that our kids are monitoring whether or not they're understanding, that they're working together. We've talked about graphic and semantic organizers a bit. Same thing with question answering and generation. Story structure can be very difficult, but it can be a support and a scaffold to help our kids understand. If they understand the order of how you have the beginning, the middle, the end, and why, what normally happens in the beginning of a story. Now, frankly, I never cared about the exposition and the rising and all that, but having kids understand the story, that gives them a hook to a schema to hook it onto, and it helps them with the predictability. I just have a couple of these that I'm sharing here. One is the summarization. Here's a wrap strategy: read, ask yourself, and put it into your own words. This is very, very difficult for some of our kids, or that summarization piece. So I have a sample lesson from Read, Write, Think that I'll put into the chat box for you. But again, it all comes down to what's that main important piece. Who or what is this about? And then tell me about that who or what, or what are they doing with that? All right. A couple last things before we get into one last breakout where I have an activity for you that pulls all this stuff together. So I have some reminders for instruction, like how are we going to bring all this stuff back together? We already had that one. So let's first talk about prevention. As we're preventing the kids from needing supports and extra interventions, remember that we spent a lot of time on understanding phonology, because we want to make sure kids understand the sounds of our language. Then they can map them and make connections between those sounds and the symbols. That's that explicit and systematic grapheme, phoneme, and grapheme sound instruction, going both from what they see to the sounds, and going from the sounds to what they write or they're looking at. So remember that going from speech to print is going to be the biggest bang for your buck on memory. But when we read, we go from print to speech. So it's two sides of the same coin. We need to go both ways. And even though this comes from David Kilpatrick, and these are his words, opportunities to read connected text. And this is from multiple studies. The biggest bang for your buck has all three of these. I would argue that also needs to be changed to read and write. The more we are writing, the stronger connections we're making. That's going to get the biggest bang for your buck, adding in the writing piece, particularly when it comes to the intervention piece, the remediation. Love that quote at the top from David Kilpatrick. I think it actually comes from Foreman and their colleagues. Even students with the most severe reading disabilities can improve their word reading skills. Let's make sure that we pay attention to phonological awareness deficits. Let's teach that phonemic awareness to the advanced level so they can manipulate phonemes. Remember when we went from clash to crash, or play to pay, or stick to sick, changing and recognizing just those individual phonemes in words. Let's make sure we're teaching and reinforcing the phonics skills, the connections between the graphemes and the phonemes. And phonic decoding is translating those letters to the sounds and squishing them together to make words, and spelling doing the opposite process. And of course, lots of opportunities to reading connected text and writing. And so reading the connected text, I also want to add in the importance of decodables for practicing the patterns you're working on, and natural text for the kids to see how often those patterns really occur in natural texts, in both speaking and writing. Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so because at its heart, the components of effective, did I resume recording? Checking because once we have someone leaving. Thank you, Jill. The components of effective reading instruction are the same whether the focus is prevention or intervention. Phonemic awareness, phonemic decoding skills, fluency in that word recognition, you can do it automatically, and text processing, thinking about text, making those connections among the words and phrases, construction of meaning, vocabulary, spelling, and writing. Remember, those are the big pieces. It's a bit more than 5: phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, text processing, meaning, vocabulary, spelling, and writing. Still, it's within 2 hands. We can handle that, right? How does it look across the grades? I love this, and I actually have a reference, not here in the chat box, but I can make sure it's in our reference guide, so where you can get this. Because I love this chart showing the progression from pre-K through 12, where you notice my print concepts, hopefully I'm going to get those by the end of kindergarten. My phonological awareness, including my phonemic awareness, again, hopefully I have them by 3rd grade. Hopefully, I had high schoolers who were still struggling here. My notice basic and advanced decoding, I'm going to be continually using it, refining it, transferring it to new contexts. That's that little thin blue line that goes along the way. Same thing with the fluency. But look at what's happening concurrently on the bottom is I'm working on my language comprehension, working on that oral language, building my background knowledge, my understanding of vocabulary, my listening to comprehension, my reading comprehension. All this is happening at the same time. And it's happening in the writing as well. Some of these, I'm not sure I agree with their order. I would put, you've got grammar in one place and sentence structure, syntax in the other. To me, those go together. But nonetheless, it's an interesting way of looking at, let's make sure we get the handwriting. And to me, handwriting and keyboarding, that's that translation. So the difference between translation and transcription. We can also look at the one by Jan Wasowitz that I think shows these two in a stronger way. And actually, I do have the link for this. Let me grab that in the chat box. And I'll also pull up Jan Wasowitz's for you. Let me get that for you in a moment. So this comes from intensiveintervention.org. So we put that into the chat. And Jan Wasowitz's is a little bit different, but I think a little bit stronger when it comes to the writing component. So let me share that there. So you can see, actually, it's not even big enough yet. Is that one? Let me go 150 and pull that away so you can see that better. And I'll put the link for that into the chat box. Download the PDF here. I don't know. Let me go grab this one. And if that doesn't work, let me know, and I can make sure that. I think I have a clickable here. Is that? Yep, there it is. I'm going to grab that. Because, people change their sites, their sources. But notice on the left, language comprehension, written word recognition, just as the reading rope that we were looking at earlier. On the right, we have the opposite of comprehension is expression, your ability to speak. And then how do we translate our thoughts that are verbal into writing is that written word production. So recognition and production and comprehension and expression. Because that's how we bring all of these pieces together. Somebody asked what my training was in OG. It was Slingerland. And so I'm going to put in a chat box where you can see a demonstration of this at the phrase and sentence level. I think this is a younger group too than what you've seen in the videos I've shared so far. But you can see what we are learning and practicing how to form our letters. On the visual side, we're doing individual letter sound connections, both visually, and then we do it also auditorily on the other side. It leads to decoding of whole words. We've then into phrases for preparation for reading, and then the phrased reading and paragraphs and beyond and reading for that from a book. And then on the auditory side, we're doing the same thing, only we're going from speech to print instead of print to speech. Okay, one last activity for you. I think we've got enough time. So in the Jamboard, there are two things. One, I'm going to give you an opportunity to take a look and create your own elevator speech, but I have an activity for you. So I'm going to take us to the Jamboard. And this is one that you're going to have to work together because, and I might have to rearrange the rooms because we've lost some people, because this is going to be a little hard, but it's going to really draw on what we've done together. Where did the Jamboard go? I don't see it here. I must have accidentally gone over that one. All right, let me go back to my chat and get the Jamboard for us again. Here it is. And it is the one that has a bunch of boxes. So we're going to go to the activity. Hopefully that you all are there. I do see many people there. So if you're not there and you need it again in the chat box, just let me know. I went into the chat box to get this for you. So this was one from something we talked about earlier. Here are some reminders that I didn't have, but I had it from a previous that I put in there. This is what we're going to be looking at. What you're looking here at each of those boxes. Thank you. I will grab those for you, Alicia. In each of those boxes are examples of student errors. And you'll see, are they some different, the yellow boxes are what kinds of errors they could be. Are they phonological errors? Are they semantic errors? Orthographic, so that remember how things are spelled and written. Syntactical errors, syntax. Discourse errors, the larger units, thinking of phrases, and morphological errors. Thank you, Colleen. So I want you and your group to talk about where do these, how many do we have left? We could probably do 2 groups, right? Yes, we could. So where would these go? And if you want to do your own and not want to share with everybody else, you can go more actions and make your own copy. And so you could be looking at yours instead of the whole groups. But we can also look at them together because this is tricky, and it's something that I want you to process and talk about. All the things that we've learned, some kind of takeaway, and process this. So I'm going to pause the recording again. It looks like either you all did it together, or at least the group that did this got them all right. So the question is, how was that? How'd that feel? And what did you talk about? And what is your elevator speech, your takeaway? Who would like to share out first? And in the meantime, while you're speaking, I want to thank you for growing this.
I always talk, but you know, speech therapists kind of thing, maybe. I don't know.
No one
But-
seems to mind, Jill.
Or I just am impatient and don't wait for people to chime in. I jump on it. But we were just saying that it was a really helpful. I love this activity because then it kind of lets you know where to target. If you can identify where what box their errors are in, then you kind of know how to target your teaching.
That's totally the point. Woo! Where's my heart icon? Awesome, Jill. How did we do? Was it easy? Was it something that, no, you're glad you worked with other people, Nina? I'm still blown away when Louisa Moats will talk about errors that kids make and how she can just pinpoint exactly what's going on. Someday.
In our group, we did say it would be nice to have the definition for these 6 words written right on the card of the word. and then we could place it easier, right? Because it's just
Mhm.
not vocabulary that I use.
I'm in.
And that's exactly, and I will tell you, Nina, the more you use them, the more comfortable you get with it. And that's just as with anything. And so I've had people take the same classes again and again. And in fact, I don't know if Roxanne was able to contribute orally. She was having some computer issues, but I've seen her in many of my classes. And sometimes people will say, you know, I've heard you say that 6 times and now I get it. And again, it's you hear it again and it sinks in, or maybe you get a little bit more nuance. You know that expression when people say, people hear what they want to hear? That's not true. People hear what they're ready to hear. They need to have the schema. They need to have the background. They need to have, and just like our kids with reading, if they don't have that schema or background, it's not going to stick. It's not going to make sense to them. And so what a great opportunity for you to feel what it's like for your learners as well. Thanks, Nina. How about we have one more minute. I'll put up my final context and resources slide, but one last sharing for someone. Thank you, Rachel. Many ways, multiple times, and visuals, lots of different ways to get things in. Do we have an elevator speech that someone would like to share before we close out for our day and our session? How you communicate your learning to someone else, or what's the most important point that you want to make sure we take away with us as well. Remember, when we verbalize to internalize, and it also, when we say things orally to the group, it becomes an accountability. It becomes, I'm taking this with me. Go ahead, I heard a voice. Thank you, Roxanne put into the chat box. Lifelong learners, repetition is the key to success. Thank you. I think that's a great way to leave things. I did put in a couple last resources. The resources that you see here, the Dyslexia 101 handouts, the explicit literacy instruction, everything, and then the Padlet of my literacy and dyslexia pieces as well. So thank you, Rita. Thank you, Nina. I understand the feeling of overwhelm little by little. You know, we start somewhere and then we keep building. There was one grammar class I had, it was so overwhelming, and I just copied everything down, and eventually it started to sink in. You got to start somewhere. So thank you for, as I said on the last slide, thank you for growing with us. I continue to learn every time I teach, and I learn from you, and I learn what's important and how to make things clear, and we keep working. So thank you. Have a great afternoon, evening, summer. And if you have input and ideas on what would be a good time of day of week, month to have if I'm only going to teach just 2 times next year instead of 4, help me pinpoint when will be best to do that.